Hello and welcome to the arcade! The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Course Booster Pass released its final wave in November of 2023. Since then, I've had plenty of time to play all the new tracks and even pick some new favorites. And at first I had this thought, I'm not typically one to buy into DLC for video games, but I felt like this just had a fantastic value for the price. You get 48 new tracks, a bunch of new characters and costumes for your Mii, and all this for just $25? If you're a big fan of Mario Kart 8, then this purchase seemed like a no-brainer. Or is it? Just because there's a ton of new tracks doesn't mean that they're necessarily fun or even good. So we better do some investigating to see if all these new tracks are really worth it. Today I want to talk about every single new course from the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. Jeez, that's a mouthful. We'll rate them, rank them, and then decide if the DLC overall is worth the price of admission. I'll review them based on a few different factors, and then I'll rate them with a good, a great, a throwaway, or a legendary rating. So here we go. Here is the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass Retrospective. Wave 1 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass released in March of 2022 and included both the Golden Dash Cup and the Lucky Cat Cup. Starting off with the Golden Dash Cup, we have Paris Promenade from Mario Kart Tour. I feel like this track was a nice showcase for how good some of the tracks from Mario Kart Tour can actually be. As a non-Mario Kart Tour player and general doubter of mobile games, this track almost changed my mind about Mario Kart Tour being, well, not really worth it. This track is pretty good overall. It has a nice design both in aesthetic and in layout, and we also get nice variety with the last two laps taking different routes than the first that actually has you go in reverse of the original direction of the track. This can make for some fun or frustrating moments as you fly past other racers who are still struggling to catch up to you, but overall I'd call that variety a good thing. It adds some fun unpredictability while not being completely unfair. I'm giving Paris Promenade a good rating. Next up is Toad Circuit from Mario Kart 7. Man, there is really not much to say about this one. This is one of the most bland tracks to come out since Mario Kart 7. The only variety is 2 shortcuts and 1 glider section, and even those aren't something that couldn't have been done back on the GBA in Mario Kart Super Circuit. The track offers almost no replayability with its lack of challenge, lack of variety, and overall bland nature. All of the Mario circuits did it better than this. I'm rating this track throwaway. Up next is Choco Mountain from Mario Kart 64. Choco Mountain. I always find it really nice to see the tracks from Mario Kart 64 remade in newer games. They were always easier to imagine an HD version of rather than the tracks from older games. The older games tracks basically had to be completely remade from the ground up, but with the N64 ones, they don't need to change much to become great new modern tracks. That being said, the new Choco Mountain lacks the charm of the original. Maybe it's the more drab aesthetic or the slight changes to the layout, but this one just doesn't feel like a worthy successor to its original track. I enjoyed the boulder section the most, even though it offers no challenge in this version of the track. Otherwise, the track looks pretty dull. Even the glowing crystals in the cave don't really add much for me. They seem too out of place. Choco Mountain needed to be more bright and lively for me, but I'm still ranking this one with a solid good. Next is Coconut Mall from Mario Kart Wii. Coconut Mall is an absolute masterclass in Mario Kart course design. Everything from the layout, the variety, the unpredictability, the item placements, and everything in between, this is one of the most fun and satisfying tracks to play in the whole series. And the soundtrack is also fantastic, by the way. Right away, we have the 2 separate railings with either a reverse pad or a forward pad, and right then you know you're in for something special with this track. There's tons of little lips to get a small boost or trick off of, which adds to the skill ceiling of the track, which makes it more fun to play with real players. There are a handful of spots where you can choose a path through the mall, and a couple shortcuts too. And surprising no one, I am rating Coconut Mall with Legendary. Now, just in the first cup alone, we have 2 solid good tracks and 1 legendary. This cup is setting the standard for the Booster Course Pass going forward, even if they had to include 1 stinker. But since they actually released 2 cups per wave, let's move on and see how the Lucky Cat Cup stacks up against the Golden Dash Cup. First up in the Lucky Cat Cup is Tokyo Blur. There are some things I like and things I don't like. For example, most of the track feels way too skinny. I feel like this is a result of coming from Mario Kart Tour, where you wouldn't need as much space on the track since it looks like it has kind of an on-rails feel to it, but I can't really say that with any amount of certainty, so take that with a grain of salt. I have barely played Mario Kart Tour, I don't know what I'm talking about. And while I do like the more realistic city scenery, unfortunately for me, it starts to make all of these real-life city tracks start to blend together. I do really like the changing paths during the second and third laps though. That adds a good amount of variety, but even that said, especially compared to the other city tracks from Mario Kart Tour, I can still only rate this one with throwaway. Next up is Shroom Ridge from Mario Kart DS. Shroom Ridge is a neat little track from Mario Kart DS that I actually slept on for the longest time. I always felt like it was trying too hard to emulate that Toad's Turnpike feeling, but really the layout of this course feels so good to drive on, at least for the way that I play, and the amount of real cars that you have to dodge, as well as the ever-present cliffside, make this one super fun and pretty much endlessly replayable. It also has some upgrades in this version where you can use the glider. That's one thing that I always hope remake tracks do. Like, if you're not going to make the track at least look spectacular now that it's in HD, the least you could do is add in glider, underwater, or anti-gravity sections to remake tracks to bring them up to speed with the gameplay innovations that have been made since they released. Enough ranting about that. This one gets a great. Next is Sky Garden from Mario Kart Super Circuit. Sky Garden is one of my all-time favorite tracks from the Mario Kart series. Is it weird to say a Mario Kart track is underrated? Well, I'll say it anyway, Sky Garden is underrated. Sadly though, this remake doesn't quite capture all the magic of the original one. I wish this one felt like it was going for more of the Mario 64 vibes, which I definitely get from the original. It is still really good though. It's got a very clean aesthetic, it doesn't look too cluttered like some of the city tracks can start to look like, and while it is one of my personal favorites to drive on, I still have to just give this remake one a good. Up next is Ninja Hideaway from Mario Kart Tour. I did not initially realize that Ninja Hideaway was a Mario Kart Tour track. This one felt so detailed and so fully realized. I guess I just never expected that level of polish and style from Mario Kart Tour. Just one more example of my own ignorance of that game. This track has always been one that I kind of struggled with, to be honest though. I feel like the immense amount of detail lead to the feeling of not knowing where to go or where the road stops or continues. That might be a me problem, but at least when I first tried this track, I felt like I had no idea where the turns were coming up half the time. But it does provide a really nice challenge and mixes up things a lot, especially when it comes to all of the different multipath sections of the track. And come to think of it, there are actually quite a few multipath sections here, so yeah, this one is getting a great. At first, I would have just given it a good, but the more that I play it, the more it grows on me, so yeah, this one is great. And that was it for Wave 1. We got one legendary track with Coconut Mall, but we got 2 that I would call throwaways. Still, I feel like we ended up with more on the good side than bad, so I believe that myself and most players called Wave 1 a success. Too bad we had to wait almost 5 months for Wave 2. This wait time in between wave releases, at least to me, did not feel warranted. Don't get me wrong, I was really excited and grateful for getting new tracks in the game, but 5 months just felt like a suspiciously long time to get the next wave. Regardless, in August of 2022, we finally got Wave 2 of the Booster Course Pass, which included Turnip Cup and Propeller Cup. Starting off with the Turnip Cup, we have New York Minute from Mario Kart Tour. New York Minute was really when the feeling started to sink in that I personally was getting really tired of the city tracks. While it is cool that they stuck with a theme for each of the first courses and all the new cups, like I said earlier, all these city tracks just start to blend together for me. I would have preferred they remake more tracks from older games in the series, like more tracks from Double Dash for instance, which just did not get nearly enough love in the Booster Pass overall. All that said though, New York Minute really isn't a bad track at all. It's actually pretty good. It just doesn't feel very Mario Kart-y, if that makes sense. There are some cool real-life recognizable landmarks, but I'd rather have some recognizable landmarks from the Mario series if I'm quite honest. And of course, the track does the thing where the last 2 laps change the direction of the course and all that, like they all do. So we'll just go ahead and give this one a solid good. Up next is Mario Circuit 3 from Super Mario Kart. Now, I'm definitely biased for the tracks that I'm really good at. I played a ton of Super Mario Kart in my life, so remakes of tracks from that game are typically going to be right up my alley. But as much as I love this track, I feel like it's really hard to rank these ones any higher than good. They just don't do much more in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe than they did back in Super Mario Kart. There's no glider sections or anti-gravity sections. It does have some solid shortcuts though, and it is a nice layout with a really tricky turn near the end. So while it's a really fun one for me, I wouldn't go any higher than a rating of good. Up next is Calamari Desert from Mario Kart 64. I really hope this isn't just nostalgia talking, but man, Calamari Desert is a stone cold classic. Even the original track on the N64 was one of my favorites ever, and this remake let me do the one thing that we always dreamed about: driving on the train track and going inside the train cave. We all wish we could do that when we were kids, right? Now this is exactly what these track remakes should be doing. Expanding upon the original idea and using the mechanics invented after the original track was created. The layout of the track is relatively simple, but there are some risk-reward moments to test you, and of course driving towards the train on the track is so much fun. This is how you do a remake. This track is legendary. And last for this cup is Waluigi Pinball from Mario Kart DS. Speaking of legendary, Waluigi Pinball is such a fantastic addition to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This track was pushing the boundaries of what I thought was possible back on the DS, and it makes total sense for it to be included here. It was one that I always wanted sooner, but better late than never, right? I feel like this track has some of the most varied sections of any tracks in the game, and they're all tied together with a great and really interesting theme, that being the pinball board, and it all comes together to make one of the coolest tracks in the series. This is clearly another legendary track. Up first in the Propeller Cup is Sydney Sprint from Mario Kart Tour. Another one of the city tracks, but this one does have some unique flair to it. First off, the music is super catchy and I love it. And I really love the design of this section with the ramps in the middle of the bridge. Any chance a course gives me to choose which path I want to take is always welcome. Sydney Sprint also just feels like it has more variety to it than most, if not all, of the other city tracks. And not just in the visuals, but in the different sections. Like when switching from paved road to brick road, and it all still feels really cohesive. The paved road has things you'd expect like the metallic ramps on the bridge, and the brick road has little gardens and things like that. Nothing is cross-pollinated. Surprisingly, I'm giving Sydney Sprint a rating of great. Up next we have Snowland from Mario Kart Super Circuit. I like this one. It's simple enough, which, yeah, it's simple since it's coming from the GBA, but I like the shortcuts a lot, and the layout of the track is really satisfying to drive on. There's not too much else to say about it. It's a simple, good track with just a couple of shortcuts. It's one of those tracks that kind of acts like some breathing room in the middle of a Grand Prix Cup. I probably wouldn't vote for it in an online match, but it's fun enough to race on, so I'm giving this one a solid good. Up next is Mushroom Gorge from Mario Kart Wii. One of the most legendary tracks in the Mario Kart franchise, I'm sure Mushroom Gorge needs no introduction. This is simply one of the most fun levels in any video game in my opinion. There's so much variety in this track, and the perfect amount of little gimmicks as well. Mario Kart Wii was pretty much full of awesome tracks, but this one is definitely in the absolute top tier for me. From the branching paths, the mushrooms to hop on, and the big cave near the end, everything in this one is an absolute joy to play, and makes for one truly iconic track. A real masterpiece in my opinion. The only thing that could be better is the music, but even that is decent enough. This track is legendary. To finish off Wave 2, we have Sky High Sunday from Mario Kart Tour. I went through a roller coaster of emotions with this track. When I first played it, I absolutely hated it. I felt like the track was too skinny. A lot of turns were way too tight, and the parts where you dropped down felt way too floaty. After some more time playing it, it kinda grew on me though. It's really intense, especially at 150 or 200cc. It feels like you're just constantly building speed up, and at any second you could go flying off the edge. but the more I play it now, the less connection I feel to it. It just feels too claustrophobic. The aesthetic is fantastic though. It reminds me of Fall Guys or Wreck-It Ralph. But again, it just feels too tight. Like it was meant to be on rails or something, and those rails are suddenly missing. For me, it just doesn't do enough. I'm just gonna have to go with a rating of throwaway. And then, after another 4 months of waiting, we were finally treated to Wave 3 in December of 2022. Wave 3 contained the Rock Cup and the Moon Cup. Just going off the track list, it was obvious that this wave was going to be the best so far. First up in the Rock Cup, we have London Loop from Mario Kart Tour. London Loop may not be the strongest opener. I really wish they didn't start all these waves with a city track. But it does have a lot of things that I like. For example, a new direction to go on each lap, like all the city tracks tend to do, and the really big shortcut across the grass behind the chain chop, and the opening and closing bridge, which reminds me of the bridge from Delfino Square in Mario Kart DS. Overall, it's another city track, but it has enough to consider it good. Up next is Boo Lake from Mario Kart Super Circuit. Once again, this is how you do a track remake. Excellent atmosphere and presentation, tough but rewarding branching paths, added ramps and underwater section, and a challenging shortcut as well. This may not be the best track ever, and it's also way too short, but it's so well designed and it's an excellent improvement to the original in pretty much every way. This one gets a rating of great. Up next is Maple Treeway from Mario Kart Wii. Another iconic Mario Kart Wii track. Can you tell how biased I am yet? Mario Kart Wii is one of my favorites, but can you really blame me? They really pulled out all the stops for the course design in this game. But the glider sections in the remake just add so much enjoyment to the track. There are a few changes that don't make sense to me, however. Like, why did they remove the net? And why is the bridge shorter? But either way, this is still one of the most fun tracks in the entire series. Not much else to say here, but this one is definitely legendary. Up next is Rock Rock Mountain from Mario Kart 7. In my opinion, one of the better tracks from Mario Kart 7, Rock Rock Mountain was always one of my favorites from that game. Not really in my top 5 of all time or anything, but a really fun one. It might overuse the glider, but that's also what gives this track its own identity. I also really like the ability to glide across the pipe sections at the end of the lap into the beginning of the new lap. It's a tough challenge that rewards players who are precise enough to navigate through it. If I had one critique, it would be that the cave section is too short and boring. If they had extended that and maybe added another branching path inside the cave just before bursting back out into the sunlight again, that probably would have been the touch that this one needed to be more than great. Okay, so the Rock Cup had a good, a great, a legendary, and then another great. That's going to be a tough one to beat, but let's see what the Moon Cup has to offer. The Moon Cup starts with a Rainbow Road? Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 7. I did not see that coming. Until I did see it coming on the announcement post for Wave 3. Anyways, this track is amazing. It's designed in what is probably my favorite style, 3 sections instead of 3 laps. Another great example of a track like this is Mount Wario, but Mario Kart 7 was actually the first in the series to implement tracks with this design, of which it had 3, Woohoo Loop, Maka Woohoo, and of course Rainbow Road. I love this because it's a huge departure from the standard formula of 3 laps, and it forces you to memorize more of the track layout if you want to get good at the track. It also adds a lot of variety when it's done right, since you never repeat any part of the track like you do in a normal lap race. So how does Rainbow Road stack up? Well, it's pretty great actually. In terms of Rainbow Roads, it might actually be one of the most fun in my opinion. It feels so fitting that Rainbow Road is a sectioned race instead of 3 laps too, for some reason. And all of the different sections have some exciting thing to race through. I love the space aesthetic of the Rainbow Road tracks, and this one actually lets you jump right into the theme by riding on the planet ring and on the surface of the moon. This track is so much fun, and I have been playing it a lot more lately. It might actually be inching close to my top 5 of all time. We'll see about that. And even though many people missed this one originally, I think it totally fits here in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and shows no signs of being a retro track at all. All that said, I'm not afraid to give this track a rating of legendary. Up next is Merry Mountain from Mario Kart Tour. Merry Mountain is another one from Mario Kart Tour that doesn't really feel that much like a tour track. It has branching paths, a half pipe, and a glider section, so it uses the mechanics of the game really nicely. I do like the choice too of, do you want to cut hard inside and get some mini turbo, or do you want to go up the half pipe for an item and a potential bigger boost off the end of that? I also really love the Christmas and holiday aesthetic, as that feels pretty unique. Not much else to say here, but this is a really solid track. I'd even say great. Up next is Peach Gardens from Mario Kart DS. Peach Gardens was one that I didn't really expect to see here in Mario Kart 8. It already got a retro track re-release in Mario Kart Wii, and then another version in Mario Kart Tour. The version here appears to be the Mario Kart Tour variant, as it does that thing a lot of them do where it reverses the final lap so that the leaders are racing directly into oncoming traffic. I generally like the design of the track, although no part of it is very challenging. It feels more like one of those leisure type tracks, rather than anything that would require time, dedication, or extreme focus. Still, it is pretty fun, and it feels good to drive on, so I'll give it a good. And last we have Berlin Byways. Berlin Byways finished off Wave 3, and was originally a Mario Kart Tour track, obviously. And for me, it shows. Tight raceways, but no really tight turns or anything too challenging. I'll give it some credit for the car ramps and the womps, but it's just not a satisfying track to drive on. Sadly, Wave 3 ends with a whimper and another throwaway. And then, in typical fashion, 4 months later on March 9th, 2023, Nintendo released Wave 4 of the Booster Pass, which contained the Fruit Cup and the Boomerang Cup. Starting off the Fruit Cup is Amsterdam Drift from Mario Kart Tour. Amsterdam Drift, in my opinion, is one of the better city tracks. It has quite a bit of variety, as it's not just a city, but also has a Moo Moo Meadows style section, and we also get glider and underwater sections as well to mix things up a bit. And then of course, since all the city tracks change their path a little bit on each lap, this one ends up feeling like one long course instead of 3 laps of the same thing. It's more of a standout than the other city tracks. Not quite up there with Paris Promenade, but pretty close. It's a solid good. Up next is Riverside Park from Mario Kart Super Circuit. Riverside Park is probably my favorite Super Circuit remake. One of the things with the Super Circuit tracks, now that I'm thinking about it makes total sense, is that because they didn't have gliders or underwater sections, to make a good track they had to really rely on good course design, making turns that feel challenging but fair, and coming up with good shortcuts. This track has that and more. In this remake, we have jumps to trick off, we have updated music and graphics, and we have new shortcuts only made possible with some of the newer items from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And this is another great example of how to make an old track even better. I'm rating this one with great. Next is DK Summit from Mario Kart Wii. What can I say, it's another Mario Kart Wii banger. Admittedly, it was a track I always struggled with back in the day, but if you learn it well, it rewards you heavily against players who are not as familiar with it. I love the trick bumps near the beginning and the half-pipe section at the end. And I always love a rocket launch that shoots all the players to the same location a mile away. It's just plain fun. DK Summit is definitely great. Up next is Yoshi's Island. Now here is a brand new track to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which was later ported to Mario Kart Tour. It didn't usually go that way, but hey, I'll take it. Yoshi's Island has a ton of fun little quirks. Firstly, the music is changed to be in the style of Yoshi's Island, even the jingle that plays before the countdown at the beginning of the race. There's also a disappearing and reappearing shortcut in the air? That is crazy and super fun. The track has a great variety, with glider sections and underwater sections, and really satisfying turns to drive. There's also a ton of references to Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. First of all, the race starts at Yoshi's house in a field that looks just like World 1 from Super Mario World 2. There's also references to World 5 and World 6, and probably a ton more that I missed. I just can't say enough good things about this track. It was unexpectedly legendary. And moving on to the Boomerang Cup, we start off with Bangkok Rush from Mario Kart Tour. Bangkok Rush is actually a really fun city track. It doesn't do much different from any of the others, but it just feels a little better in my opinion. It has some elements that remind me of the original Mario Kart 8 tracks, as well as some of its own flair. There's even a part that is reminiscent of the spiral staircase from Airship Fortress, or another track that does something similar. It's a really good city track from Tour, and I'm easily giving this one a good. Up next is Mario Circuit from Mario Kart DS. Now, it's hard for me to rank the Mario Circuit tracks. On one hand, they are pretty basic, vanilla Mario Kart tracks. But on the other hand, that's exactly what they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be an easy track to get people familiar with the game and its controls and things like that. Similar to how the mainline Mario games give you the first section of the first level with no enemies, just so you have some room to breathe and figure out what the controls do and stuff like that. However, I have a ton of nostalgia for this one. Mario Kart DS was probably my most played DS game, maybe behind Pokemon Diamond. I played so many hours of this in solo and with my siblings and my best friend. But at the end of the day, it's just a Mario circuit. I'm not realistically going to give this one any higher than good. I still love it for all the memories and everything, but yeah, I think good is fair here. Up next is the first one from Double Dash, Waluigi Stadium. It seems that Waluigi has upstaged his evil counterpart. This is clearly the superior stadium track in my opinion, and is the first Double Dash track in the DLC so far. It's not changed very much from its original, but there are added half-pipes which weren't in the original, but were in the Mario Kart Wii version. Some of the track elements in this one just feel super fresh and unique, like the jumps with the circling fireballs, the long section with the half-pipes on the sides, and the robotic piranha plants in the middle. There's also some tough shortcuts that more advanced players can attempt, but for the most part, this is a really fun, fair, and balanced track with some amount of challenge as well. It's really exciting most of the way through, and the only thing I don't love is the drabness of the aesthetic. Sometimes that color palette can just feel a little grating. But I mean, it is a change up from most other Mario Kart tracks in that way, I guess. All that said, this track is great. To close out Wave 4, we have Singapore Speedway from Mario Kart Tour. While it does have a lot in common with all of the other city tracks, this one sets itself apart with some amazing and plentiful glider sections. Also, during the actual city parts, I feel like the course designers did the best job of blending the real-life elements of Singapore with the Mario Kart theme. And I really appreciate the section with the forward and reverse panels next to each other. That's always a fun thing to encounter in tracks like Coconut Mall or Toad's Factory or Rainbow Road. This is surprisingly probably the best city track to date. And I typically don't think too highly of the city tracks, but man, this one really is great. Then, after a few more months of waiting, Nintendo released Wave 5 on July 12, 2023. Wave 5 included the Feather Cup and the Cherry Cup. Starting off with the Feather Cup, we have Athens Dash from Mario Kart Tour. Athens Dash is another city track, but this one feels so much different from the rest in my opinion. It really evokes the dry desert type of track with its sandy ruins. There's also some fun uphill sections where you have to try to hit the boost pads while avoiding boulders, and then another upstairs section where you avoid some Goombas. It is weird that there's no cannon to launch you up at this section. Instead, it's an uphill glider section, which just feels odd to me. But that doesn't mean that this track isn't well designed. It really is a super fun city track and has a pretty unique setting from the rest of them. This one is actually really good. Then we have Daisy Cruiser from Mario Kart Double Dash. This one is always a good time. I love the inside section where the tables and chairs are sliding around because the ship is moving back and forth. I also love the aesthetic of these tracks that feel like a nice vacation or island getaway. It really lines up well with some fun, casual go-kart racing. And anything that feels more like Super Mario Sunshine or Wii Sports Resort in any way is great in my book. I like the Goomba pool section too because it shows that sometimes even the bad guys need a day off. And I do like the part where you can stay above deck or drop below for an alternate path with some clams and item boxes inside. This is a really solid track. Unfortunately, it's a little too short, but it's still really good. Up next is Moonview Highway from Mario Kart Wii. Moonview Highway is one of the traffic-based courses similar to Toad's Turnpike and Shroom Ridge. Something interesting about this one is that the placement of the boost pads is randomized between races, meaning you won't necessarily be able to memorize all of the spots to hit a boost on the ground. One fact I also love about tracks like this is that even though there are real cars on the track, they are never moving fast enough to not feel like a real obstacle. It makes driving through tight spots feel more exciting and frantic. And the fact that the cars are moving as well just adds so much to the excitement. Tracks like this are particularly fun in local multiplayer as well, so that bumps this one up for me to a great. I am so biased for Mario Kart Wii, aren't I? And last, for the Feather Cup, we have a brand new track, Squeaky Clean Sprint. This is one of my favorite tracks ever in the whole series. I love the kind of ribbon road perspective where players feel like they are super small and racing around in a big room inside a real house. This time it's the bathroom though instead of a bedroom, and that adds a lot of fun and unique things to experience. We start off going through a giant sink, fly by some cassette tapes and a tape player, and then make our way into the bathtub and down the drain. After that, we are on the bathroom floor being moved around by the wind of a fan, presumably trying to dry out the floor or some towels that got wet while we were all kart racing around these poor people's house while they were just trying to live. The floor is slick with water too, so you can't turn as tightly here, which is a nice touch. There's an upper shelf section too that you can go on as well to add some great verticality to the layout. But the layout itself can feel slightly chaotic at times. Too much variety is sometimes a bad thing, and while my overall enjoyment of this track doesn't really suffer for that, I do think it's enough to knock it down from legendary to just great. And that wraps up the Feather Cup, so now to look at what the Cherry Cup has to offer. Starting off with Los Angeles Lap from Mario Kart Tour, we have some nice landmarks like the boardwalk, the beach, skate parks, and then some normal city streets and even a construction zone. I do enjoy the glider section as well, as it's always nice when glider sections have those boost circles that you try to hit instead of just trying to get back to the ground as fast as possible. But even all of that doesn't really make this much of a fun track to play. I just find myself really bored by the pacing of this track even at 150cc. There are too many sections that are just too empty, and even though the landmarks are cool, there's not enough to interact with along the way. There's also a strange lack of cohesion when the track transfers from one area to another, making for some really confusing pathing, at least on my first time playing this one. Overall, there's just not enough here for me to ever want to really revisit. I'm going with Throwaway. Up next is Sunset Wilds from Mario Kart Super Circuit. Sunset Wilds is another one that I was already really familiar with from having played tons of hours of Mario Kart Super Circuit as a kid. However, the remake does not really do anything that couldn't have been done on the GBA. There's only a couple of added jumps, there's no glider or underwater or anti-gravity sections, and the color palette is so bland here. The redone music is nice, but that's about all I can say. It's just not a very engaging track, but also doesn't act as a good palette cleanser between tough tracks either. It's definitely one of the more skippable tracks in the entire game, and that's coming from someone who loved the original. This track is definitely a throwaway. Starting off with 2 throwaway tracks was a poor start, but we're about to bring it back with one of the most iconic Mario Kart tracks ever, Koopa Cape from Mario Kart Wii. While no remake could ever match the fun of the original, this one does come quite close to matching that same feeling of fun and discovery. There are so many little details to appreciate, like how the effects on the music change when you go into the pipe underwater and how it changes back again when you come out. This track is the definition of how you create variety in a track layout while maintaining a cohesive theme. And not only does it feel super good and fun to drive on, but it has a lot of meaningful choices in the way that it divides up the different sections of the track. I probably don't need to ramble on about this one. It's one of the best tracks in the whole series. You all know I'm gonna call it legendary. And finally, to wrap up Wave 5, we have Vancouver Velocity from Mario Kart Tour. This track just has such a nice vibe to it. The atmosphere is just intoxicating. The music, the visuals, all of it gives this track a really nice feel. Even though there are some sections I feel are a bit too tight, this track does all of the things that I feel like a city track should do, including famous landmarks in interesting ways, mixing up the track layout on each lap, and utilizing Mario Kart 8 physics and mechanics in interesting ways. This track is really solid and really fun. It's so fun that I'm actually going with great. And finally, after a year and a half, and 5 other waves of cups and tracks, we finally got the last batch of the Booster Pass. On November 9th, 2023, Nintendo released the 6th and final Wave 6, which contained the Acorn Cup and the Spiny Cup, the last 2 cups of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. With their last chance to give us some new and interesting tracks, let's see how they did. Starting off the final wave is the Acorn Cup. And first up in the Acorn Cup is Rome Avanti from Mario Kart Tour. Rome Avanti is another city track and continues the trend of what I think is the city tracks getting better and better with each new wave. While there are plenty of landmarks and real-life elements to this track, This really feels like a Mario Kart track should. It doesn't do anything crazy, but it at least is up to par with standard Mario Kart fare. I do wish it had a little bit more interactivity in some of the S-curve sections, but it's a fine track, and I can easily say that it's good. Up next is DK Mountain from Mario Kart Double Dash. DK Mountain is my personal favorite track from Double Dash. We start off with a small section of turns and items before we arrive at one of my favorite Mario Kart staples, the Cannon Blast. Once we reach the top of the mountain, we navigate downhill, dodging the crevasse and canyons, as well as some boulders tumbling down the mountainside. The last section before finishing the lap is the wobbly wooden bridge, which is just iconic. I pretty much love everything about this track, from the design, the music, the layout, the item placement, and the different elements they use to make this track feel unique. While I never really played Double Dash in my childhood or anything, to me this track is still legendary. Next up we have Daisy Circuit from Mario Kart Wii. Obviously it's going to be one that I'm really familiar with since I spent countless hours in Mario Kart Wii, but it's not really one that I hold in the highest regard when it comes to that game. It's definitely a fun track and it does mostly everything right, but there are some choices and some sections of the track that just don't feel that fun to me. For example, the last section of each lap feels like the finish line just comes out of nowhere. It feels like it should have been placed slightly differently, either further forwards or further back, not right in the middle of this section of road. I also don't really love the super sharp turn section, or the section near the beginning where it's really easy to accidentally go off-road. Overall though, it's still a really good track and pretty fun, so I'm going to give this one a solid good. See, I'm not completely biased towards Mario Kart Wii. And finishing off the Acorn Cup, we have Piranha Plant Cove from Mario Kart Tour. First, I'll say the good things. I like the underwater theme and the music, and the exploring of the underwater ruins is a really cool idea. I also think that all of the track hazards fit perfectly with the theme of the track overall. It feels like a nice little adventurous track. However, I'm not really sure why it took me this long to realize something about the Mario Kart Tour tracks, but something about this track finally stuck out to me. Why do all of the Mario Kart Tour tracks feel so mid? Sorry, it's the only word I can think of. I think one reason might be the simple fact that the layout changes every lap. Sure, you do get the variety of changing paths throughout your playthrough, but it can sometimes feel like the track designers relied on variety instead of just good, solid, fun-feeling tracks to drive on. Like, they thought that changing up the track mid-race would hide the fact that most of the track is kinda boring? Not all of them are boring, but I do think that you can't just trade solid design for variety and have it automatically be better or even good. Sorry for the little rant there, I just had to throw that in there before we get to the end, which sadly we are fast approaching. Oh yeah, and Piranha Plant Cove gets a good. And finally we arrive at the final cup of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. Jeez, that's still a mouthful. The Spiny Cup. Of course it had to be the blue shell or the spiny shell, didn't it? Everyone's favorite item. Kicking off the final cup is Madrid Drive from Mario Kart Tour. Again, I'll start off with what I like. I like Madrid. It reminds me of some of my favorite tennis players who dominate at the Madrid clay court tournaments like Rafa Nadal and Dominic Thiem. I like the indoor sections of the track too. I think they have a really fun and nice design to them. And I like that some of the indoor to outdoor transitions remind me of Sunshine Airport. However, this track overall is pretty boring. There are too many long sections with zero interactivity on the course. Sections with no ramps, no boost pads, and even no item boxes to pick up. This just makes for a very nothing track overall. And while I don't really hate the track, I just feel like it's pretty much the definition of a throwaway. Next up we have Rosalina's Ice World from Mario Kart 7. This track has such an awesome design, calling back to Super Mario Galaxy, and really beautiful music too. It's also one of the more challenging tracks that I can think of. The cave section at the beginning with the half pipes and the crevasse, and then the ice section with holes in the ice, and then the section with boost pads right next to the cliff. These are all pretty challenging areas, and a welcome challenge at that. Playing Mario Kart single player can sometimes feel like you're just beating up on the CPU all the time, but this track actually makes doing that somewhat difficult if you haven't practiced it very much. There is nothing in this track that I don't like. I can easily give this one a rating of great. Up next is another one of my favorite tracks of all time, Bowser Castle 3 from Super Mario Kart. While there are a handful of really awesome tracks from the original Super Mario Kart, Bowser Castle 3 was always my personal favorite, and this is the absolutely most perfect and most definitive version of this track that there is. They did everything right with this remake, from the redone music, the added anti-gravity sections, and what they did with the walls that block and force you to choose a path in the original is just genius. If all of the Super Mario Kart and Super Circuit tracks could be remade with the quality and attention to detail as this one, the Booster Course Pass tracks may have overtaken the original as my favorites in the game. But hey, at least we got this one masterpiece. This was already a legendary track in my opinion, and they did everything right in this remake. This is absolutely legendary. And now it is finally time for the last track of the DLC. The very last track of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Course Booster Pass, Rainbow Road from Mario Kart Wii. How fitting that we end with the best Bowser Castle and then the best Rainbow Road to bring it all home. This honestly is the best Rainbow Road track in the whole series, and in my opinion much better than the original Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 8. Its track design and layout is simple yet challenging. And while there are more guardrails in this version than in the original, it is still a tough run to get through the whole thing without falling off the edge. The music and presentation here are absolutely top-notch as well, bringing back that classic feel from Mario Kart Wii in all its glory with a new coat of HD graphics. The addition of the anti-gravity is added perfectly, and I might even have to say it. This might be better than the original. For the fact that mostly everything is the same, except we get added anti-gravity and get to play in the control scheme and setup of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is hard to argue against that it controls much better than any other Mario Kart game in the past. And while we started off with a throwaway track here in the Final Cup, we more than made up for it with a great and two legendaries to end it off. That's right, Mario Kart Wii Rainbow Road, the final track of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Course Booster Pass, is absolutely legendary. It's one track that I will remember forever. I can now say without a doubt that the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Course Booster Pass is 100,000,000% worth the price of admission. With as many courses and new characters they added, this could have easily been turned into a full-price sequel to Mario Kart 8. But they chose instead to expand the base game, ensuring that we have a title that is absolutely positively loaded with fantastic content that will keep us busy and having fun for hundreds of hours to come. It was a long road to finally get here to the last wave of the DLC, but it was definitely worth the wait. And now a quick recap of all the tracks and their ratings so I can further prove my point that this DLC is worth it. We have 16 tracks ranked good, with Paris Promenade, Choco Mountain, Sky Garden, New York Minute, Mario Circuit 3, Snowland, London Loop, Peach Gardens, Amsterdam Drift, Bangkok Rush, Mario Circuit, Athens Dash, Daisy Cruiser, Rome Avanti, Daisy Circuit, Piranha Plant Cove. And we have 14 tracks in the Great category: Shroom Ridge, Ninja Hideaway, Sydney Sprint, Boo Lake, Rock Mountain, Merry Mountain, Riverside Park, DK Summit, Waluigi Stadium, Singapore Speedway, Moonview Highway, Squeaky Clean Sprint, Vancouver Velocity, and Rosalina's Ice World. And in the throwaway category, we only have 7 tracks: Toad Circuit, Tokyo Blur, Sky High Sunday, Berlin Byways, Los Angeles Lap, Sunset Wilds, and Madrid Drive. And finally, in the legendary category, we have 11 tracks: Coconut Mall, Calamari Desert, Waluigi Pinball, Mushroom Gorge, Maple Treeway, Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 7, Yoshi's Island, Koopa Cape, DK Mountain, Bowser Castle 3, and Rainbow Road from Mario Kart Wii. It's obvious to me that the value you get with this purchase is well worth the price. But I would love to hear what you think. Do you agree with my ratings? And if not, what would you change? Do you think that overall the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass is worth the price? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.